All right. Well, first things first, you are Colin. You are the product manager for Hedgehog.
Yep.
So why don't you just give us a little background? How'd you end up in crypto and at Hedgehog?
Sure. So I've been a product manager now for, depending on how you count it, 6 to 7 years. Before Hedgehog, I was at Microsoft for 4 years, working as kind of the main back-end product manager on Power Query. Power Query is one of the most heavily used data ingestion tools in the industry, serving as the kind of the engine of data ingestion into Excel and Power BI. So that was a pretty technical back-end role. And it was a great team. I love the team, truly high productivity team. But the problem with being in a company like Microsoft is that everything is about fitting into this broader picture and executing within that broader picture. And there was definitely a lot of leeway within our team, but we had so many commitments, it was really hard to figure out how much of what I was doing was my own insight and vision and execution capability, and how much of it was just trying to make sure that I was following along inside the boxes. And you're really constrained on how much of yourself you can put into things. So I've been friends with Colton for a number of years. Colton is our CTO, for those watching. And we'd been chatting about Hedgehog off and on for a little while. And he said, look, we'd love to have you, but you need to talk to Taylor, our CEO. And so I started chatting with Taylor, giving him some pro bono product perspective, talking out feature work with him, all that type of stuff. And when Hedgehog started to expand a little bit after they raised, they came and talked to me. They said, look, all of our founders are heads down in the code. We need somebody to have kind of a higher perspective view. You have experience, so why don't you come on board? And I had interest. I really legitimately believe in Hedgehog's product. I obviously am in the crypto space, but I'm not I'm not exclusively in the crypto space. I have other areas that interest me in the data space, or, some of the stuff in the AI space. These are all interesting areas. So it's not like I was committed to moving into crypto, but I did believe in Hedgehog's product and vision. So that's kind of how I came into Hedgehog. Yeah.
That's awesome. There is one thing I kind of read your bio right beforehand, just to kind of refresh myself, because we've been working together for a year now, and I can't believe I've never asked you about this. What did you do on submarines? I'm dying to know.
Yeah. So I briefly worked on submarines out of college. Kind of what happened was I had a roommate in undergraduate, and after we graduated, she went off to work on subs, and I was looking for work after my master's degree. And I was texting with her, and I'm like, oh, I'm at the airport, and I sent her a picture or something. She's like, are you at the Denver airport? I'm like, yes, I'm at the Denver airport. And I called her, and it actually turned out we were 10 feet apart in the same airport, just total synchronicity, and about to get on the same plane. So we got on a plane, same plane to DC, which was her destination and a stop for me. And we're chatting, and she's like, look, I'm quitting my job. I'm going to go work on particle accelerators, which is what she does now. She's a chaired professor who does particle accelerator control systems theory with machine learning. Much smarter than me. Much smarter than me. Hi, Orly. If you see this, you've always been better at math than me. And she's like, would you like my job? I'm like, well, yes, I would like your job. I would like a job, but your job also sounds good. It's vetted. So she put me in touch with her boss, and I interviewed. And what I worked on for a little while, not that long, was so submarines are giant bar magnets, basically. And because they have fairly large geometry, they have distinct signatures. And a lot of mines will look for different signatures: sonar signature, optical signature, magnetic signature. And I can't go into too much detail here.
Sure.
And so the department that I was in was responsible for understanding the signatures of these giant bar magnets in the ocean and doing what they can to minimize it with various electromagnetics. And I think that's a kind of a high-level view. I was in the simulation team.
That's pretty awesome, though.
Yeah, so unfortunately, sequestration hit about 8 months after I joined, and it
Mm,
wasn't a great fit either. So I was, back out on my butt, trying to
okay,
find new work.
that's awesome. Well, you've done a lot of things. Like I know that, and I can tell that too just by working with you. You've done a ton of things. Um, for you, I don't know. Like, what do you feel like the difference is? And you know, like a ton of finance things. Every time we talk, you.
Let's put a break on that. I don't know that much. I do what I can, do what I can to learn.
Well, as far as building a product, like, what do you think the difference is? Like building a product for cryptocurrencies versus like what a traditional finance product would be.
Yeah, so I came into working at Hedgehog from working in the data space, not the traditional fintech space. So I think I can't really do a direct compare and contrast, and I don't want to give the impression that I can. I can talk a little bit about the problems we have that are a little bit unique. So, in crypto in America, ETFs and index funds are, effectively banned, which is to say none of them have been approved. And this offers some limitations on, among other limitations, but offers some issues on how people can get exposure to the space. There's a lot of different exchanges that, maybe where different large investment banks would keep order books or whatever, private order books, not the public ones. You have all these different exchanges and they have different rates, and ETH BTC might be different on Gemini versus Kraken versus Binance, right? There's much more, instead of stocks and bonds and derivative products and complex financial products, we have things like layer twos and staking and yield and all this stuff. So there's, it's not, I wouldn't say more complicated or less complicated than finance, but it is very different. The market's also never shut down. There's more ways to access public data. You can, if a transaction happens, you can see it on a block explorer. That's something that's actually a pretty key feature in our application, is being able to see when you make a deposit, hey, where is this on Etherscan? Then you have the whole thing about self-custody. You don't self-custody stocks these days. I guess you can have a literal physical printout of the stock, but that's not exactly normal, and I don't know if that's even still a thing.
Yeah, it would be odd, right, to have a paper.
And like bearer bonds aren't really a thing anymore. They may even be illegal in the U.S. Transferring around assets is different. The whole idea of wallets, transaction fees, because sometimes the transaction fee is, it's literally consuming a portion of what you're trading, right? So there are a lot of different considerations in both ways.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, and you're right. Like, as far as platforms go, cryptocurrencies, it's not like you don't shut down at the end of the night and like pick it back up the next day. It is like 24/7. So, as far as like who the ideal user is, or like who do you think, or maybe like some of the groups of users would be, who do you think would get the most out of the Hedgehog product as it is now?
So because we're a product doing something that nobody's really done before, I think that narrowing down, obviously we want to focus on delivering features for each of these groups, but saying it's for this group and not that group is, I think, a little bit premature. People who are committed to just one coin, I think, could be the people who are least interested in Hedgehog. If you're a self-custodying Bitcoin maximalist, and you have absolutely zero interest in interacting with the traditional financial world, you're not doing any rebalancing, you can just buy Bitcoin or mine Bitcoin or participate in a pool, whatever, then you're probably going to get a bit less out of Hedgehog than most other people in the space. So that's kind of the caveat there. But it really is got something for everybody. For small users, we can really handle a lot of that. Do I want to make this bet or this bet, right? By working with us and using the tools we'll provide, you can make sure that you're not, even if you're not heavily investing into micro caps, small caps, right, that you're not missing them at the very least. And you can stay in those different small market cap tokens without having to constantly do research. with the caveat that we are limited to what's supported by Gemini, right?
Sure.
But really, for a fairly small fee, you can make sure that stuff isn't growing without you knowing about it because you happen to be in a different community, right? You're not missing any rising tides.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think that's like an important thing you just mentioned. It's hard to research all of these things in real time, and balance your portfolio on your own. Like it's a difficult thing to do. So one of the products we have has over 80 assets in it.
Yeah.
That manages itself, and the calculations run every day, right?
They can run every day. They can run, every time you refresh it, it's going to run it, and you could have the option to rebalance. You can set it to rebalance once a month. You can do it based off of error. There's a lot of, capabilities there. And we are limited. Obviously there is the limitation of what Gemini supports today. And even when we expand that to self-custodying, it could be the limitation of what Trust Wallet supports, or what Ledger supports, or what our OTC desk supports. So there are limitations. We can't give access to the entire market. I think at this point there's some over 100,000 tokens in the market if you counted every single micro, nano cap token out there. If you pick the top 10, it's going to get you something like 98% of the market. So clearly there's a very long tail fall off. And that's something we have to think about a lot with how we design these portfolios and what features to expose and stuff. There's some metrics that are independent of market cap, or how many people use it. One that I've talked about with our CTO just recently is the number of transactions per user, right? So that's not a measurement of how widely adopted it is. It's a measure of the people who have adopted it, how much are they using it? How much utility are they getting out of it? So there's a lot of different questions like this.
Yeah.
And that just continues to become even more important. Obviously, larger investors have more tools they can afford, more things, available to them. And when you get to a certain point, you're going to spend a lot of your time managing your assets or being aware of it, but you have a lot more money on the line. And, obviously a guy who has $5,000 in crypto, he cares a lot about that $5,000, and he may care a lot more about that $5,000 than the whale who has 1% of his assets in crypto, but those 1% is $100,000. But $100,000 is still a lot of money. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And or maybe not a lot in finance terms, but it feels it's not just a latte.
Sure.
And especially in this era where we have higher interest rates, and you can just say, you know what, screw this asset class, it's too risky. I'm just going to go buy treasury bills. My bank account gives like 3% now, I think, something like that.
That's so crazy. And
you can get certificates of deposit on up to 5% now, right? So it's not like you're scrambling for return anywhere. So for these large investors, what they can do is they can have a thesis. And I think that's really what I want to provide to these large investors is they have a thesis, whether that's the index fund thesis, the crypto total market cap, or a gaming thesis, or an NFT thesis, or a metaverse thesis, right? That they can then say, I really want to bet on this, I want to put money on this, and we offer them all the tools to construct that. From my perspective, for these large investors, there's a lot of emerging and developing whatever markets in the world. And if I want to go invest in global emerging economies, or emerging economies minus North Korea and China, I think is one variant that shows up on some sites, I can go to Vanguard and I can be like, what is your emerging market index fund? And I'll pull it up and I'll buy, $10,000 of this. And you can't do that really in crypto, or you couldn't. We have, a couple competitors that offer something like this, but it's it's hand-selected baskets of assets, and they don't update them. Whereas we are very metric driven, and after we've gotten out the door, I'll talk about this a little bit later, it will be something that you can tweak yourself. So really the dream is to get users diversified exposure like they can with any other exotic asset class. And then finally, institutions. I talked to a number of institutions last year, And what I found is there really is no institutional grade diversification solution. If you're a company that has, $10 million of $20 million, whatever, of staking, right? And you're staking this one token, and it's sending you this token, sending you this token, sending you this token. You don't have a one-stop option to turn that into a market cap distribution of assets, right? You're on that token, and maybe you're converting to ETH, right? But if you just want to have that very diverse exposure, there's no easy way to do that. There's a number of asset managers who are kind of constrained in how easily they can offer new products, and we're happy to talk to them too.
Yeah, and that kind of brings up the next point. Like, as far as you've done research on other products that are out there, like, our features that include the stacks, which is the basket of cryptocurrencies put together, and the rebalance feature that kind of keeps these assets on strategy. What is different about what Hedgehog has versus kind of the similar products for cryptocurrencies out there right now?
Yeah. So most of the other projects, the ones I'm aware of, do one of a couple things. There's one competitor that I'm aware of that operates in a similar regulatory and kind of app space as us, where they offer fixed baskets of assets. And I think they probably hold it in an omnibus. I'm not certain about that. And you say, hey, I want to buy this basket of asset, and they buy it for you. And when you withdraw, you can basically only withdraw in, I think, USD or Bitcoin, something like that. Likewise, there's a number of cryptocurrencies that are kind of trying to get around ETF rules. I think TCAP is one of them, crypto total market cap. Mm-hmm. There's sets. There's a couple different things where it's like you have a receipt that says I have some amount of these underlying crypto assets that I can exchange this for, but you're still just holding kind of this token, and you have to rely on the exchange. And as we found out, there are a lot of cases where these systems don't unwind gracefully. Now, mm-hmm. I'm not going to say that the traditional financial system is any better about that. What I am going to say is that if you have more comfort with somebody that is kind of regulated by the SEC and can point at their individual deposits, or even do a blockchain audit of their individual deposits, that's a little bit different than having full faith in the structure of the smart contract that will unwind those TCAP tokens, for example, into underlying. And I have a huge amount of admiration for the TCAP guys. This is just more about people's comfort with mm-hmm. different products. So stacks, we're going live with fixed stacks, mostly to just make sure that everything's working right. It's gentle introduction. But everything we've done to give these stacks that we build, we can do to let people build their own stacks. And that's really exciting to me, right? Because I have personal judgments about certain tokens, and no, I'm not going to share any of them, right? But as somebody trying to offer diversified exposure, I try not to let my value judgments impact that, right? I don't expect mm-hmm. Vanguard to be like, wow, this stock sucks, we're going to take it out of the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index, and I feel that same, same obligation. Mm-hmm. But for my own assets, there's stuff that I might want to filter out based off of my perspective on where I think the industry is going to go, which is very different from my fiduciary duty to my customers. Because that perspective is not necessarily a professional perspective. It's like gut feelings and stuff that I would never, mm-hmm. Trade passive investors tokens on, right? Everybody has very mm-hmm. strong feelings about this stuff. And so all the tools we've built for building these stacks are going to be made available for people to build their own stacks. And the thing is that when you buy crypto through Hedgehog, and this is for our custodial product, not necessarily the tracking product that we will be doing, kind of built off our V1, you own those assets legally. We're managing them for you in your name on Gemini, or in the future, whatever other backend we're using. But you own those, and you don't own the Hedgehog total crypto market stack at $100,000. You own $70,000 of Bitcoin and $25,000 of Ethereum and $4,000 of this. Maybe my numbers are off, but you get what I'm saying. I don't think Bitcoin and ETH are quite that high in that stack. And if you want to take your account back, you'll say, hey, turn my account over to me, and we'll get you your account. If you want to withdraw those assets, you can withdraw those assets. If you want to sell it all into cash, once we have our fiat off-ramp integrated again, you can sell it all into cash. So it's very much you choose what's in it, and you can get in and out of it. The rebalance stuff and kind of our balance model, which is a little bit too complicated to get into here, is really where our distinct advance in the field came from. And what the rebalancing lets us do is you can say, I want to rebalance, say, once a day, once a week, once a month, depending on your appetite for transaction fees, right? Because those do exist. Or you could say, if it drifts 5% off target, rebalance. If it drifts 15% off target, let it rebalance. If it drifts 50% off target, let it rebalance. And these are ways to make sure that you're not getting hit with something unexpected, considering how volatile the market is. And finally, while we're not 100% sure which metrics we're launching with, right? We're definitely launching with market cap. We can introduce new metrics like total transactions, total wallets, transactions per wallet. We'll be looking at momentum metrics at some point, and you can pick kind of what the thing rebalancing your portfolio is rather than just market cap. So that's kind of an overview of what we'll be able to do with our custodial product.
Something you mentioned too that I really wasn't familiar with until we got closer to launching is, you mentioned that a lot of other projects use what's called an omnibus. And I think that's like a very important term to know. And from what I understand is that basically means that your funds are held together with everybody else's funds in a pool. And you have a receipt showing how much of that pool you occupy.
It's kept on often an Excel spreadsheet or a database, preferably a database. But as we found out recently, certain institutions were doing things in Excel spreadsheets that they shouldn't have been. With us, you can go look at these wallets, right? You can look at the deposit addresses. Now let's be fair. Gemini does hold this stuff. They are the ones who created those wallets and stuff. But we are not. These are all separately managed accounts. Your assets are not being intermingled with somebody else's assets,
right?
At all. And we follow, all the custody rules as far as that goes as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good distinction. Like as you mentioned, when times are good, it doesn't matter as much. But when things go wrong, is when
you like to know that your money
important.
You like to know that your money is your money.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I like that.
Just to pull it back for a second, that's one of the
Sure.
mottos. I think we put it on our consensus shirt is our tech, your crypto.
Yes, right? I love that one.
Now,
yes.
Philosophically, my view is that, there's a technology and getting a product to market requirement for custody. But the less responsibility that we have, the less control we have over people's crypto, and the more we can focus on giving them tools to properly manage it, the happier I am. If we could deal with a warm storage, every warm storage provider, right, and manage on top of those warm storage providers, so except for those moments when we were rebalancing, it was as secure as our customer wanted it, right? That would be great. I would love to be able to do that, because Hedgehog is really focused on helping manage those assets, and we do believe in helping people custody their assets. It's just getting that vision is going to take some time.
Yeah, and the education part is so great too. Learning how to manage investments, especially in the cryptocurrency space, is awesome because cryptocurrency is exciting. It's volatile, which is one thing in itself, but it never sleeps. And I was talking to Colin last week, and he mentioned a stat that over 55% of people, their first investment is cryptocurrency. That's the thing that kind of inspired them to invest some money is watching like an exciting asset class. So I think the education part is a very cool thing. And I know you spent a lot of time, making sure that that's like a focus. So it's a cool thing.
Yeah, and I think that I'm hoping that our learn capabilities help. But also I think just tooling to help people make the right choices. There's a perspective I have, and this is kind of about support, which is that the best way to prevent support cases is to not let people make erroneous operations. That's not to say don't let people do things they want, but
Sure.
to not let them do things that they don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then you make it clear how to resolve problems that they may have caused, right? How to undo or how to resolve it. And then after all that, you have, education and stuff. Education, I think, in an ideal world is more about helping you set, from Hedgehog's perspective, helping you set goals rather than, having to make you do the complicated stuff. Because ideally, we're handling the complicated parts of this, right? Since it's not an active day trading platform or anything like that.
Right.
Our goal is to let you pick what you want the outcome to be, the strategy, the perspective, the thesis, whatever, and then we'll handle all the hard parts for you.
I love that. All the buys and sells and calculating how heavy one thing should be over another thing. It's great. As far as, development goes, how different has this project been versus what you've done in the past?
Yeah, so it's both larger and smaller in scope. I feel like there's a lot more to keep track of in terms of individual little pieces, but at the same time, it's touching a lot less than previous project I worked on. Working on Power Query, like I mentioned, I think we had 36 partner teams, right? So that's 36 individual teams at Microsoft that were taking dependencies on us at one point.
Wow.
Not counting all of the customers and the external vendors that we integrated the software into, right? So there's a sense of size there, and also the maturity of the code base, what you had to consider when adding features. A lot of stuff just slowed things down just because any change could impact millions of people. On the other hand, it was, a lot of that wasn't like a conceptual stretch, right? It was the really hard parts. A lot of that groundwork had been laid down. And this is obviously product manager privilege to say this, right? But it was kind of a just juggling people. Here, it's a bigger product in terms of just like, I have to figure out those base level interactions with engineers and what types of consequences there might be. Developing how our balance and rebalance model worked took quite a bit of time for this reason, because it's like working with a Rubik's Cube with barbed wire. If you turn it wrong, your finger's going to get torn up. And then you go and you cry a little bit and you think about, okay, so this is the edge case. Does that generalize? Well, you hope it generalizes because you don't really want to have a long case of specifics. Or do I, if I do solve this, does it handle something else, right? So that's kind of something interesting about greenfield development, especially in something like finance. So that's kind of my answer. Is it's a different type of big, and then just generally having more responsibility.
For sure. Yeah. How is it, like wrangling developers and even being kind of the boss of the CEO at points, here? What's that like?
Yeah. So when I got my product manager job at Microsoft, and I know I keep coming back to this, but it's kind of a contrast for me. My GM, my general manager at the time, during my final interview, he said, so, working with developers can sometimes be a little different. And I go, all of my best friends are developers. I get it. He's like, oh, okay, good, right? So I think that, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there's also a kernel of truth there. Software, especially with the kind of where we're at in the startup space, is such a intersection of an art and a science, and everyone brings their own perspective to it. There are certain generalizations you can make about developers versus product managers versus engineers, whatever, and you do have to operate from that as a default to a degree when you're working with somebody new, but you have to be flexible. as a product manager and as a project manager, and these two things don't always go hand in hand, but they happen to in this case. It's my job to see a certain vision created, but I can't tell you, except by gut feeling and experience, if something is impossible or not. I can ask. I can kind of, there's some stuff I know, like I can't say, oh, this thing that's talking directly to infrastructure isn't going fast enough, make it faster, right? There's certain things I obviously know are unreasonable. But like I can't say, yes, it should be easy to do this thing. So really, I think that you have to understand what drives people, both as developers broadly and as individuals. You need to understand how their skills and perspectives inform that. It's hard to, both as a product manager and as a developer, it's hard to leave our own preferences sometimes at the door to focus on customer preferences. And you have to kind of have a catalog in your head of where that comes into. And especially, I think, for some developers, and this isn't anyone on this team, this is people I have worked with, but not so much on this team. You get, because you've lived with working on this feature day in and day out, you get very strong feelings about how you feel it should be used, but that doesn't necessarily match what the customer expects. And that customer who is almost always never as technical as the person who developed it is going to have very different expectations. Mostly, I think it's about giving respect, but not giving infinite leeway. We are turning out a product. It's not a science project. It is kind of a science project, but that's not all we're doing. So making sure that as much as people have the space to implement and not feel like you're breathing down their throat, that the eye is on the ball and that they're focusing on delivering features that will solve a customer problem. Because at the end of the day, at the very end of the day, we make money by solving a customer problem. And so every feature we deliver should be focused on solving that problem.
That's a great point. And that kind of reminds me of, kind of this question I had too, that we have, with the customer in mind, we have like a kind of an institutional type group of people versus you're very retail, that 55% that's like, this is going to be their first investment. Like, how do you differentiate the development process to kind of cater to both of those groups of people?
Yeah, so in my experience, smaller users care a lot more about usability in your core features. And institutions kind of care more about meeting a list of what's critical for business needs. If you are buying for yourself, and this is a business software perspective, and Hedgehog is one of those things that kind of sits right between consumer and business software. If you're buying for yourself, you're looking for something that kind of annoys you the least. If you're buying for other people, you're looking to make sure that you can achieve the goals because you're paying them to deal with the pain in the ass that is the software, right? There is a number of times where I worked on features at Microsoft where it didn't need to work perfectly. It just needed to work, right? And sometimes it feels bad delivering features like that because you're like, man, this is clunky, or it takes too many clicks, or it doesn't make sense, but it's going to take another 3 months to get it into that shape, and they want it now, right?
Yes.
And that's kind of very opposite from the consumer perspective, where things that take a little bit longer to load or confusing interfaces or whatever can cause lots of individual drop-offs, right? So this is kind of the many small users versus a few big users balance. The other big thing is that institutions are more likely to leverage an API if it's available. Luckily, that's something that should be pretty easy for us because of how we've built the application. Integrations into other software, accounting software, tax software, whatever. This isn't really a Hedgehog relevant one, but something that I dealt with a lot at Microsoft is single sign-on, wanting single sign-on into their Azure, their AAD, Azure Active Directory, or into their Amazon identity management system, right? So that all of it's in one business kind of identity. So those are kind of the types of things that you see different between individuals and institutions.
Well, it's I know it's we're just trying to deliver like a really great product, and I know that consideration on who it's for is probably like somewhat of an afterthought. But I do feel like that a lot of time has been spent making sure that this is a robust and like easy to use products.
I wouldn't say it's an afterthought. I'd say that you can have a vision of who it's for, but in a product that's so broad spectrum as this one, and it would be hard to make it narrower in many ways, you don't necessarily know which market segment is going to be the one that picks up and runs with it, right? You don't really want to cut yourself off either. So the end user is absolutely not an afterthought in picking like features. We do think a lot about, hey, you know, is this going to confuse people? Is this what they need? But I think instead of focusing on saying this is our focus market very strongly, right? We pick a few different ones. Obviously, we're going live with focus on individuals who are investing small to large dollar sums, but we're expanding that look into institutions. And the other part is making sure that you're saying, okay, we are not worried about this group of people, right? So Hedgehog right now is not focused on people who want to do technical analysis or people who want to do a lot of day trading, right? That's not our target market. And there are great tools out there for that. And it would be silly for us to try to compete with those when there's this whole space that's not really well treated.
Yeah. And, you know, I was wondering too, how does Hedgehog and the product that we have now kind of fit into like the larger cryptocurrency investing ecosystem?
Sure. So I think the first thing to note is that, like I said before, in many ways, we are a way to get the same type of exposure into crypto as you might have into existing exotic assets. Today, our software doesn't depend on crypto to work. We are a software that serves the crypto market, but we don't depend on crypto to work. That may change. There are certain value adds that we're looking at, triple entry momentum accounting stuff that involves taking a hash of all of the different parts of a very complicated transaction, like the smart contract. And there's other things that have to do with oracles, and you'd have to ask Colton about this stuff. But we don't depend on crypto to operate today. We also aren't a token issuer. We don't issue NFTs, all of these different things that some companies are looking at to raise money. There's no strong value add to it today. We fundamentally serve as a bridge for people who want to be able to address this new market and all the interactions with it in the same way they might address any other emerging market. And there's other people like that. There's all these different financial services companies, custodial companies, whatever. But we're very much a company focused on making that bridge legitimate and easy to use.
Yeah, and working in cryptocurrency, there's sometimes like legislation changes or things like that, and we've had to kind of spin on a dime. Like, as the person who's in charge of the product and working with the developers, as a non-developer, what's it kind of been like when you have to pivot and go a new direction very quickly? Yeah,
so I think the quickness is kind of interesting because in most cases, if you have to pivot very quickly, it means you missed something. We haven't had to do one of those traditional startup pivots per se, or perhaps Hedgehog V2 could be considered that, but we're now quite a ways into that, and the discussion took time. The most recent one, it wasn't really a pivot of the core product. Obviously, that Fed letter went out in early January about kind of a warning to banks about cryptocurrency exposure, and that caused us some issues with our banking provider. You can go look at, viewers can go find our blog where our CEO talked a little bit about the consequences that had for us. And that didn't cause a pivot per se. It did mean we needed to look at additional features for funding, which is why we're launching with crypto funding rather than fiat funding. You just got to do your best. You have to rely on feedback from your engineers and figure out what that means in terms of features and how to meet the new requirements.
Like some of these legislation changes, did make us, change the way we're going to do funding and things. But we're also, I feel, one of the more compliant companies working in cryptocurrency, what kind of advantage do you think this path, even though it's taken a little longer, is going to provide Hedgehog, like long run?
Yeah, so I think that just to back up a little bit, the impact of the legislation changes was not because we were illicit suddenly. It's because the risk tolerance of some of the vendors we worked with suddenly went to zero for crypto as a whole. So we would, just by virtue of industry, we got put into the same bucket as a DAO might. And I understand that. It's very frustrating, but I do understand, risk and compliance officers being like, you know what? I don't want to deal with this. Yeah, so Hedgehog was kind of built from the ground up, and this is part of why it's taken us a little bit longer than we'd like to get to market, to be future compliant. Without stepping into the ideological kind of landmine field of what compliance with KYC and AML and all that stuff is, and I acknowledge that debate. To do what we want to do, we really needed to get that compliance level. So we are Hedgehog Advisers is a SEC registered RIA, and that means that we report all of the assets that we have under management and all that. And it means we can work more directly with the existing financial system, wealth managers, people like that, and it implies less risk for them because we are under the SEC's purview. In fact, we recently had our first SEC kind of examination. When you can comment whatever you want on the timing of that with regards to recent events late last year. And we've responded, but I think it went pretty well. And when that's done, we'll be able to say, hey, look, we talked to the SEC and this is what they said and we responded and this was the outcome, right? And I think that's really valuable because there's a lot of stuff where people may be interested in this as an exotic asset class, but it's kind of concerning without some of those assurances. There's recent SEC rulemaking. They have a proposed rulemaking about federal custody rules in terms of what type of custody audits and stuff there are. And just by virtue of our stack working with Gemini, we're fully in compliance. We're set up so that basically at any time, if we have an auditor come in, we'll have a full accounting, trail for any of our customers. Which, yes, I know some people in the community find upsetting, but that's how it is. And we'll just be very compliant with the system. At the same time, it's also a thing that we can try to become compliant with the crypto community's expectations via, publishing audits on the blockchain, and not just proof of reserves, but proof of control and things like that. That's a little bit further in the future, but it really is something that I would love to be able to implement.
Yeah, it is. It has been cool to see as the entire space has matured and expects different things. That the groundwork or the framework of this product was kind of already in line with that and something we were moving towards. It gives me a little sense of pride too that the company you work for already had the user in mind, and these were already important things to them, even though the space seems to just be kind of catching up to that now, and it's become more important. So I like that. How about anything else that we leave out? Anything you want people to know about the mobile app coming out or about Hedgehog? Anything you want to tell them?
Yeah, I think we have V2 of our application coming out soon, which we've talked about. And the thing it's mostly going to deliver is the ability to take the preset stacks that we give you and make deposits into it and have that diversified exposure I've talked about. But that's just the start. We're bringing custom stacks. We're bringing more ways to, pick the metric to measure. Are you doing logarithms? Are you doing it based off transactions? Whatever. We're looking at what we need to support layer 2s and staking. The industry lacks someone that can offer that really institutional grade diversification and management exposure until now. And if you're watching this and you're interested and you want to know more, we're happy to talk to you, and we would love to let you build on top of Hedgehog. So, thanks for the time, John. And I'm excited to have had a chance to talk at length about kind of Hedgehog and my view towards the future. And I think that's it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Colin. I know you're very busy. Appreciate your time, and love working with you. And we'll see you guys on the next one.